Welcome, everyone. We're glad that you all could join us here this evening. I'm Dr. Lisa Hunter Romanelli, the CEO of the REACH Institute. For those of you who aren't familiar with REACH, REACH is a nonprofit organization focused on children's mental health. And our mission is to ensure that the most effective, scientifically proven mental health care reaches all children and families. We do that through a variety of training programs for medical and mental health providers, and you can find out all about our programs on our website, thereachinstitute.org. We're really happy tonight to have Dr. Michael Sweeney with us from the Metropolitan Center for Cognitive Behavior Therapy. Michael is a father, psychologist, scientist, professor, and author. He's the founder and clinical director of the Metropolitan Center for Cognitive Behavior Therapy, and the center specializes in the treatment of anxiety. Michael prides himself on having practical advice for complicated situations, so we're very excited to hear that practical advice this evening. Before we get started, just wanted to do a few housekeeping things. Michael will present, and during his presentation, if you have any questions, we ask that you put those in the Q&A section of Zoom, and then we'll save at least 25 minutes at the end of his presentation to go through and answer your questions. So don't worry, we will get to all of your questions. And before I turn things over to Michael, I just want to do a quick poll just so that we can get a sense of who you all are. So we're just going to ask you to choose what title best describes you. And we're almost done. We have a few more responses coming in. So it looks like the majority of you are primary care providers, a few mental health therapists, and a few people who aren't captured by any of those titles. So those of you who are in the other category, if you want to put in the chat, I don't know if you have access to the chat, who you are, that would be great. So with that, let me turn things over to Michael.
Hey, thank you very, very much, Lisa. Any group of people that want to spend their Monday night talking about anxiety is sort of my group of people. I'm really delighted to have this many primary care providers. I'll try to make my comments especially pertinent to you. I thought I would do three things this evening. Go forward. Hold on one second. I'm sorry, my slides are not listening to me. There we go. All right, so I thought I'd do three things this evening. Are these slides coming through as...
Right now, we're just seeing the title slide.
That's not what I want.
Yes, it's moving now. Yes.
There we go. I'm sorry, that's buffering. So anyway, primary care providers, thank you for taking the time. I'll make it worth your while. I thought I'd talk about three things. The causes of anxiety, the treatment of anxiety, and then the assessment and referral process. The causes of anxiety, you can break the causes of anxiety down into four big boxes. The first of which is genetics. As you know from all the other medical conditions, genetics are just extraordinarily important. People dislike the role of genetics in determining psychiatric illness. It seems less humane to them. And maybe it seems less humane to me too. I like the idea that I am the sum of my experiences, but my familiarity with the science forces me to acknowledge that anxiety is very, very heritable. And the best way to get a really anxious child is to take one or more anxious parents and sort of mix them together. Maybe there's an extra niceness about this. You know, part of what makes it so easy for me to empathize with whatever shortcomings my own child has is that they're somewhat reminiscent of the shortcomings that I or his mother had at one time. So genetics runs the day. those amongst us who are anxious are most likely anxious because they inherited it. That point turns out to be important because it shapes your thinking about the management of the disorder. At an earlier time, we thought that people were anxious largely in response to bad events. When you think that I am anxious today because of bad events that happened to me yesterday, the way it drives treatment is backward looking. I, nervous about sleeping alone, nervous about talking to new people, worried about tomorrow's exam, must surely be that way because I have some bad experience in the past, and the ability to express something about that bad event would free me of it. And that's what was once thought to be true. That when you spend a lot of time with anxious kids, as I do and my other REACH colleagues do, what you come to realize is some kids are just good at worrying. They're sort of born with the worry note turned a notch higher than the kid next to them. That inclination, the genetic inclination towards vigilance, turns out to be extraordinarily important because I, born with the genetic inclination towards vigilance, wound up doing something with all of that vigilance. What I wind up doing with that vigilance is I selectively attend to information. You know, there's too much happening at any one time for us to notice it all. And you take from events some things and fail to notice other things, right? If you were nice enough to invite me to your home for a party, I would come. And in the course of the evening, I would say many, many things. And maybe lots of them would land really well. You know, and maybe one thing I'd say wouldn't go over so great. And on my ride home, one of those become the headline of my evening. You know, the 9 or 10 comments that really seem to pull us closer, or the one real boneheaded thing I said. The anxious amongst us have a selective attention for experiences that they categorized as failure. That habit, the selective attention for sort of things that are congruent with my anxiety, it turns out in a really fascinating way, that habit is below the level of conscious choice. For a while, I made my living as a research scientist, and we did lots of interesting studies about the causes of anxiety. And one of the things we did is we used to flash faces on the screen, 2 faces simultaneously. And one would look pleased with you, and the other one would look critical. And these flashes were in milliseconds, almost too fast to notice that there were 2 pictures. We had a fancy way of measuring where the anxious kids were looking. The anxious kids disproportionately noticed the threat stimulus, the thing that was the unhappy looking face at you. And we think that that inclination goes forward with people, right? I'm a student and I take a history test and I get a 95. There's 2 things that are true there. One, of course, is that I've gotten a 95, which is an A and objectively a very good grade. The other thing that's true is that I missed 5 things. And when I go home, I get to make the headline of that story for myself. You know, is my headline that I got the A, or is my headline that I did less well than I wanted and that I missed a few items? And the 5 items I missed this time could be 11 items next time. Then it's not an A, but a B. The social interactions I had with somebody, I noticed small things about them. And in the small things I noticed, I conjure up things that seem threatening like to me. That genetic inclination for anxiety gets transmitted in a really practical way. And the way it gets transmitted is that I am now stuck. You know, there's 100 things here. When I teach lecture halls of people, there's 50 faces in the room. And, you know, some of those faces look like, oh, this is good. I'm glad I came. And some of those faces look like they're bored to death. That if I were to notice exclusively the faces of my bored students, it would render me a different opinion about my capacity as a lecturer. Alternatively, if I see things more balanced, thankfully, you know, on average, most of them seem pleased enough to be there. That genetic inclination leads to vigilance for threat. That vigilance for threat then fills my head disproportionately, inaccurately, with more of a holy crap, the world is filled with a lot of potentially bad things. That notion, holy crap, my head is filled with a lot of bad things. Come on, go forward for me. No. That notion, my head is filled with a bunch of bad things. The thoughts in my head do not sit idle. What I think about and what I feel are intimately tied to one another, right? I sit here and it's 7:12 in the evening in New York. whatever I'm feeling at 7:12 in the evening, were I to ask myself what I was thinking at 7:11 in the evening, you'd find a pretty clear correlation. If I had spent the previous minute thinking of how harm might befall my parents, or I won't perform well at school, or my girlfriend might leave me, or etc., if those are all the things I'm thinking of at 7:11, you don't have to be some sort of prognostic genius to guess how I'm feeling at 7:12. And this interaction that's demonstrated on the screen, that thoughts, feelings, and behavior go together in a really, really synergistic way, right? I'm invited to a party, and my thought about that party is great, right? I'm invited to Dr. Hunter's house. That sounds like a good time. And my thought is, this is going to be a load of fun. If that's my thought about going, my feeling about going is optimistic and outgoing. And my behavior, were you to see me at the party, would comport with that, right? I'd be chatting to people, and I'd be out in the midst of it all. Alternatively, if you keep all of the details the same and change just one thing, which is to change the thought I have, the attitude or the expectation I have about the event, and this time, instead of thinking, wow, this party is going to be some wonderful thing, I think, oh, damn, I never quite know what to say at these parties, and big groups aren't for me, and didn't I make a fool of myself at the last one? See, if that's my expectation, if that's the thoughts in my head, my feeling about going to the party is, of course, very, very discouraged. And the behavior I get at that party is different too, right? You get a more insular version of me, a more quiet version of me, a version of me that's less likely to generate social interest. And in that way, I create my own experiences, right? The thoughts that I have, the expectations I had, have determined both how I'm going to feel and how I'm going to behave at that party. It also changes how I think about the future, because the second case, all the discouraging self-thoughts, and you said to me, hey, Michael, how was the party? I would say, geez, it wasn't so great. It didn't go so fantastic. And in that way, I'm a creator of my history. And to go one step further, if you said to me, look, Michael, there's a party next week, do you wish to go? Having had a discouraging experience, I think, geez, maybe not. Maybe I'll miss it this time. And in that way, the attitudes that I have create my present experience of things, create all the memories and history I have of things, and become a sort of guiding light for how I'm going to go forward. And in those three steps, genetics has made me more vigilant. Vigilant has made me disproportionately, unfairly, inaccurately pick up on more sort of things that seem threatening to me, people's disapproval and whatnot. And then all of those thoughts of, geez, these people don't like me, this won't go well, all those thoughts drive this thought, feeling, behavior cycle. And those three steps, genetics, vigilance, and this thought, feeling, behavior cycle, is the primary creator of anxiety disorders. The reason why that explanation turns out to be important is we now are tasked with the job of, so what do we do with all these anxious kids and adults? And what it is you want to stop this cycle that you see in front of you. You'd like to interrupt this thought, feeling, behavior cycle. And for better or worse, one does not get to change their feelings directly. I, Michael Sweeney, cannot insist that I be less nervous or insist that I be more pleased or something like that. That lever doesn't exist. That's not how feelings are built. Right? I do, however, have pretty good control over my thoughts and pretty good control over my behavior. The history test I have tomorrow, the one that I might fret about, I couldn't remind myself that I've done fairly well on previous history tests. I could tell myself how my success on these tests is often predicted by my level of preparation, and I've done a pretty good job preparing for next week's exam. You see, these are examples of changing my thoughts. Alternatively, the same cycle, I could interrupt it not through thoughts, but through behavior, right? I'm a shy guy and I don't go to a lot of parties. That's a disadvantage to me. But I could do something different behaviorally, right? I could go with somebody, right? I could bring Aiden with me. She's very friendly. And use her as kind of my emissary. Let her start all the conversations and I join in second. I could do something behaviorally. Maybe I give up on the idea of parties. That's not for me, but I'll join the chess club or some other group that's more to my liking. The one gets to have a good degree of control over their emotions. All the strategies that exist for emotions management fall into two distinct boxes. Cognition, I'm going to be smart about my thoughts, my attitudes, my expectations, and behavior. I'm going to try to be really smart about what I do and how I spend my time and where I put my efforts. And because the two boxes are cognitive and behavioral, that's how it winds up being cognitive behavioral therapy, because we're going to encourage people to make changes in those two realms. That's how you're getting, that's how one is acquiring an anxiety disorder. The next on my list is traumatic event. You do not need me to explain to you how traumatic events are traumatic to people and impairing to their lives. Since that point is so obvious, I will only make this point. The traumatic event as cause for anxiety is both true and I suggest overstated, because as you know, you will meet many, many people who are very, very nervous about things around which they have no traumatic event. Many people with illness anxiety have no bad illnesses, and most of the kids with performance anxiety are A students, and many of the socially anxious people I've met are some of the nicest people I've met. And a lot of those separation anxious kids that refuse to sleep independently have no history of anything but loving and available parents. The solution to anxiety is forward-looking. It's what's the skill I don't have now that were I to have it, I would be less anxious. So those are the steps. That's how I get anxious. A little genetics gives me a little vigilance, gives me that sort of maelstrom of thoughts, feelings, and behavior going together. That's my 10-minute pitch, I guess, for how it is that one gets anxious. Let me tell you a couple of ways to manage anxiety if you're inclined towards way. Cheerleading. You'll forgive me, there's fancy industry terms for a lot of these interventions. There's just no need to use the industry terms. You really want to be very, very careful what you say to yourself. As we all know, stuff is hard. Like I'm living in the same world you're living in. Stuff is hard. And when someone says to you, look, you have a history exam next week or a talk to give on Monday night, you should try to be thoughtful about what's the first thing you say to yourself is. If the first thing you say to yourself is some extraordinarily discouraging thing, I stink at this and it's not going to go well. This is such an opportunity for me to fall flat on my face. This is going to be one more exam where I might not do well. But that's not the beginning of any great successful mission, right? If we were on a team together and whenever we were given a new task, the first thing I did was pipe up and say, this will turn out terrible. You wouldn't want me on the team. Yet many of us say really, really mean things to ourselves. When you think of the internal dialogue you have, that forever ongoing conversation that one has with themselves, that's the fodder of psychologists, right? That's our favorite place. But when you think of the conversations you have with yourself, think of how extraordinarily harsh and difficult and demeaning you are sometimes in speaking to yourself. I would wager that if anyone else spoke to you as harshly as you speak to you, you'd probably never speak to them again. We are extraordinarily discouraging of our own efforts, and the anxious amongst us are more discouraging than most. The intervention here, what you teach the person is, boy, I really want to be smart. That when people say, hey, Michael, you've got this thing to do next week, go to a party and meet people. I want 2 or 3 cheerleading things that I can say to myself. Planning. If there's an emotions management strategy that's underused, it's planning. Planning might be my favorite emotions management strategy. See, the truth is, a lot of bad things that happen to us aren't a fluke. A lot of bad things that happen to us repeatedly, right? I'm a nervous high school kid made extra nervous by going on dates. But I can see the dates coming up from days away. I could come up with some plan for something, right? I'm a nervous flyer and I'm flying somewhere next week. You probably shouldn't wait till you're on the plane to start coming up with something to do. Our emotions are largely predictable. the things that got to us in the past are going to be the things that get to us in the future. If you've got a group of in-laws that drive you crazy and they're coming next week, they're going to drive you crazy when they come next week. The failure to plan is to plan to fail, as someone has said. And you want to do a couple of things. Two of the things that we always teach kids is calm first and plan second. Nobody makes a great plan while their hair is on fire. You should get calm first and then make a plan. And the other thing we teach kids is predicting the future. Anxious people live with great worry that some terrible thing will happen. Wouldn't it be awful if is the common thought of the anxious. Yeah. But instead of playing simply, wouldn't it be awful if? It's really nice if you spend a little bit of time predicting the future. Wouldn't it be awful if I failed that exam? But my predicting the future though is that I've taken lots and lots of exams. I'm a high school student. I've been taking exams my whole life. I can tell you it's ordinary for me. I can predict the future fairly well. And in making a smart guess about the future, I can either reassure myself that it's not nearly as bad as my anxious inclinations would have me believe, or I can make a plan to mitigate the thing somehow. I really am a shy kid and parties really are hard for me. So my plan is going with somebody because that makes it so much easier than going alone. You want a plan. If you don't have a plan, you're not in the emotions management business if you don't have a plan. The cognitive restructuring. I promised a couple of minutes ago to not use any industry terms, but I don't have a good non-industry term for cognitive restructuring. What cognitive restructuring is it's the art of looking at your own thoughts and questioning the sort of veracity of them all. I'm a psychologist by trade. I spend my life talking to people. I meet a lot of people who come to me or to the center, and they say this. They say, you can't trust anyone. And someone broke my heart. And the things that really mattered to me didn't work out. And, when what you say to yourself is, nobody loves me, nothing works out, nobody's trustworthy. When those thoughts become your constant companion, anxiety and depression are not far behind. And when you talk to these people, they're not making it up. The bad experiences they're describing are true. And you are in no way not trying to convince them the truth. What you are trying to get them to see is that while someone who loved them proved to be untrustworthy, not everybody was, and that while something that was extraordinarily important to them didn't work out, some things have. And while some friends have disappointed them, not all of them have. And you see, that's a difference, because if I say, nobody loves me, nothing works out, you can't trust anybody, that version of me is so anxious and so discouraged as to perhaps not get out of bed. And in doing so, I'm left with only my discouraging thoughts as company. Alternatively, if I tell myself, someone important to me really hurt myself, but not everybody. And something important to me didn't work out, but some things did. And some friends disappeared, but others stayed. That version of events is truer. And it also allows in a bit more sunlight. The version of me that thinks those second set of thoughts finds greater opportunity to try again. And trying turns out to be really important. You are the maker of your life. How you spend your time, who you spend your time with, and how you talk to yourself are the three big contributors. The idea that a nice life will just fall into your lap is just not how this works. And the version of me that can find the small detail there to speak to myself with a little bit more kindness, to hold on to my negative beliefs a little less strongly, that version of me finds a bit more hope and tries a bit more. That's the act of cognitive restructuring. Notice the things that you're saying to yourself. We sometimes joke around the office that you're trying to turn sentences with periods into sentences with commas. I stink, period. That's a very, very damning sentence. I stink, comma, at some things, but not at everything. that's a less damning sentence. I don't have to convince you you're perfect. I don't have to convince you that the bad things that happened didn't happen. I mean, that would be inauthentic and unempathic. But I don't have to convince you of any of those things. I just have to get you to be a little bit softer and a little bit kinder with yourself. The next intervention on our list is mindfulness. The mindfulness, if we were in a room together, I'd take a poll. I wouldn't be surprised if lots of you practice this already. The mindfulness, as it's described, is that what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one sensory experience and pay a lot of attention to it in a way that's really judgment-free. So I'm sitting in a room, this carpet is tan, that bookcase is white, that stereo is old, those speakers are brown, that chair is black. When I'm doing that, right, I'm just aware of the sensory experience. In this case, I've picked colors, but I could have picked sound. I could have picked a different sense, but I picked color for this example. You'll notice there's nothing anxiogenic or depressogenic about those observations, right? This carpet is beige. That is a true fact, but it's also importantly not an emotional fact. When I'm caught up in headlong into upset, etc., I can ground myself by what's true right now. Right now, I'm sitting in a room in a comfortable enough chair and nice enough surroundings with a bunch of books I like and some old records that I like. Right now, you see, there's nothing terrifying or upsetting about that. Mindfulness works because we've figured out who it is that's making you so anxious. And a lot of the time it's you. You're the person making yourself so anxious because you're so hell-bent on writing these extraordinarily discouraging things. That process, cheerleading, planning, cognitive restructuring, mindfulness, those are four. I could go on and list others. I picked those as examples just to see the level of practicality that you're trying to teach people. What you'd like to do is you'd like to sit with someone and figure out what things they're not doing. What's the thing that if this person knew it, they wouldn't be so anxious? You see, in cognitive behavior therapy, the occurrence of my anxiety, of my excessive, neurotic, profound anxiety, is viewed as a skills deficit, that I'm anxious sitting here because if there's a skill that if I had it, I wouldn't be so anxious. So I've just mentioned four to you, right? Planning, cheerleading, cognitive restructuring, mindfulness. What you'd like to do is put all four of those in your pocket. And then you say to me, look, Michael, next week I've got an exam. And we talk about the exam, and then we try to pull one of those strategies out. Those are all cognitive strategies. As mentioned before, there's a bunch of behavioral strategies, right? I'm nervous about exams. I can study more. That's preparation. I could study more in groups. The groups I study in give me the opportunity for social comparison. I could see in advance of the exam that I'm as prepared as others. I could go to a party and bring someone with me. Before going to the party, I can read the newspaper, arrive armed with a question to ask others. Those are some of the behavioral interventions that you have. You're trying to teach people practical things that they can do to manage the bad emotions that they have. And those, in very, very broad strokes, are many of the more structural or base interventions of cognitive behavior therapy. I was asked to speak specifically about the role of exposure. Exposure is a terrible name. We really should call these show that I can tasks. If you're extra nervous about something, at some point I want you, or the behavior therapist wants you to go do the thing with you, right? I sit here in my office scared of flying, and you, doc, say a bunch of really nice, kind, reassuring words to me, and I don't feel so bad because you seem like a nice guy. That's improvement. The person in the room is less distressed, but it's a fake improvement. The real improvement for the fearful flyer is if I can do the thing while I'm flying. The same way, the same is true for the individual who's fearful about socializing. we're going to do a thing where you socialize. The exposure in our lingo just means that I'm going to expose myself to, put myself into the situation that most causes dread for me. Now, lots and lots of things do that automatically, right? I'm a young child and I'm nervous about separation from my parents. I'm exposed to that situation every day. I'm forced to go to school. I'm a excessively conscientious high schooler who's worried about exams. I'm exposed to that all the time. The difference here is important. The difference here is that I'm doing it of my own volition. You know, there's a couple of nice things that happens with fear. Avoidance is probably fear's best friend. Approaching a fear is probably its best enemy. If you proceed, move forward, you sort of steady your mind that I'm going to try my hardest to go do this thing that makes me nervous. The act of approaching it does a lot to diminish the person's fear. The other thing that's true in planned exposure activities, and I won't get into the weeds on this because I have a level of detail that might be more than is necessary for you. But a couple of things are true. One is the quality of the therapeutic relationship is paramount. It's paramount, period. It's especially important here. You know, traditional therapies ask that a person come and talk and sort of receive your empathy. Behavior therapy, you ask so much more of the patient because you come to my office and you say, hey, doc, I'm terrified of bugs. And then at some point I say to you, you and I and a bunch of bugs are going to get near each other. I need a bunch of things to be true before I can reasonably assume that you're going to do that. One is I must communicate to you that my concern for you is sincere, that I really give a damn about this, which I do. And it's actually important to me that you get good at this. I also have to demonstrate that I know what the hell I'm talking about, that your fear of dogs and we're going to go pet a dog isn't some harebrained scheme, but I can probably convince you why it's a really, really reasonable thing to do. And the other way in which exposures that are volitional, intentional, are different is that I get to really plan carefully for them. If I'm nervous about socializing and I avoid my nervousness, what will happen is I'll get socializing thrust upon me when I'm unprepared for it. Alternatively, if I plan for these exposure activities, I'm going to go and ask that person at the front desk now if they have a pen. It's a much more controlled circumstance. And I can agree that asking an adult for a pen is a small, and asking a kid my age, if you watch soccer this weekend, is a medium, and asking someone to hang out is a large. And I can proceed that way where I go from smaller to bigger. Those exposure activities turn out to be really important for the treatment of anxiety. The sequence matters. Empathy must always arrive first. The skill teaching part must arrive second. And the request of the patient to please go do this thing that you're really scared of doing has to come third. If you get the sequence wrong, this will not work. So that's my overview of CBT. As primary care providers, you are, of course, very familiar with the medicine. The SSRIs turn out to be an extraordinarily helpful medicine for a majority of kids who have anxiety. The SSRIs are probably better, not probably. The scientific evidence is that the response rates for anxiety to SSRIs is actually higher than the response rates of depression to SSRIs, both of which come in something 60-ish%, 65%. And the questions that we get asked a lot is, so when do you do it? Like, when do you flip from CBT to medicine? Our rule of thumb is an inadequate response to CBT. We're prejudiced here because we're CBT people, but our argument has always been this, that if you can get there with skills, perhaps that's better than getting there with medicine. If you can get there with skills, the skills one hopes, kind of emboldens you, empowers you to manage your anxiety going forward. So what we typically advise people and parents is this. Start the CBT, give it a month or so. In a month or 6 weeks, you won't be better, but you'll have a sense of trajectory. And if your trajectory a month in is super duper flat, then a conversation about medicine might be warranted. But if your trajectory is fantastic, it's not. Same thing with level of impairment. The more severe the person, the less time to futz around, and the better off you are probably throwing the kitchen sink at them. The excellent studies demonstrate that the combination treatments are most helpful for people with highest level of impairment. So an impairment rating, boy, this kid's got it bad, turns out to be really important in making a medicine decision. And then the last thing that I'll comment on with regard to medicine is compliance. The SSRIs are, of course, widely prescribed for youth. Most kids fill the prescription once. That's the finding. So a lot of people sort of get bad enough to get the medicine, but then don't necessarily stick with it. There's a couple of causes there, of course, right? I mean, there could, of course, be financial barriers to it. And there might be also barriers to buy-in. Yeah, it's sort of an easier pill to swallow that I have to talk to a therapist than I need to take a psychotropic. And I've never met anyone who's taken it gleefully. And what I find most often is people who've dragged their feet. Yeah, someone's dragging their feet to take it doesn't mean it's not the right intervention. I only mention this here because I think my lack of ardor for taking the medicine is probably the best predictor of poor compliance. And to the extent that one can, you want to do as much sort of psychoed as you can, especially around expectations, because as you know, the efficacy of SSRIs is after a couple of weeks of use, right? You need sort of you're sort of 3-ish weeks in was the finding in we did a study of sertraline in kids with GAD, SAD, and social phobia, and we found significant improvement, but the treatment group only distinguished from the placebo group at about 3.5 weeks into the trial. And if you're a really nervous person and you weren't that thrilled about medicine in the first place, taking a pill for which you can see no discernible improvement for 3+ weeks requires a lot of belief. You know, it's easier to take a pill when you see immediate improvement. So be wary, be mindful of compliance issues. That's the medicine piece of it. Assessment, referral, and support. So, all right, look, it's always so hard to take the temperature of the audience when it's by Zoom, but we want to go through 3 things in this. One is how you got anxious, which we've done. The second part is the treatment of anxiety, which we've done. And now we're rounding the corner. This is our third of 3 parts. Assessment. You can get a child, a parent, and a school report. On average, kids report higher rates of anxiety than their parents, which is to say, for any given child, if you separate the mom and the child, the kid often reports higher anxiety. Now, that differs by condition, of course, right? The separation anxiety, what you have often are kids who are not that upset with the lack of independence they have, right? I'm terrified about the prospect of harm befalling myself or my mother, so I seek close proximity to her all the time. You know, I sleep next to her at night. I protest at the hour of sleep so I don't have to sleep independently. I sort of hover around the bathroom door when mom's in the bathroom and so on. When you ask those kids, how are they? They'll often tell you that they're okay, because they kind of are okay, because they've got a solution. They're hanging out next to mom. So in separation anxiety, the parent report really matters. Conversely, social anxiety disorder, I'm profoundly shy. The kids with social anxiety disorder often don't look that shy at home. You know, my social anxiety disorder is such that I make guesses that other people don't like or judgmental or are dissatisfied with me. And my internal dialogue that makes me think they don't like me is what makes me so reticent to speak. But that doesn't apply at home, because I don't think my mom and dad dislike me. So, you know, I talk to them a lot. I've had a lot of experience talking to them. So I'm a super duper shy kid. But my parents don't particularly know it. I know it. So in that case, the child report probably is superior to the parent report. And then lastly, kids who worry a great deal about school. The anxious child is typically overlooked. Some things are just easier to diagnose in psychology. You know, the boy with enormous amounts of overactivity, it's not that hard to notice. You can see him or her from a distance. the shy child, especially the super duper conscientious child, doesn't necessarily stand out in a classroom. They're a conscientious kid who keeps quiet and gets good grades. They don't run afoul of teachers' judgments. And those kids, you'll want reports from all arenas, but especially child report, because they themselves are sort of better predictors of it. So that's why you want to talk to all the parties involved. There's a couple of important factors in assessment. One scores how bad an anxiety disorder is through both distress and impairment. Distress is common, right? I'm not to say it should be ignored or you should care less about it. It's just the more common presenting symptom. I am a nervous flyer, and I'm telling you that I am distressed about the flight I'm going on next week. I'm going on the flight. That gets you a distress score. I'm upset about it, but it doesn't get you an impairment score because I'm going on the flight. Right? I'm a shy kid, and the prospect of going and talking to someone else really, really bothers me. That gets me a distress score. And because it bothers me so much, I really don't talk to that many kids. And since COVID, I've kind of kept to myself, etc. Then you've got distress and impairment. By definition, someone who has both, you have to be giving them a higher severity score. And the reason the severity score you give them matters is that severity score is going to be your basis of either initiating treatment or referring them out for treatment. If you've got impairment, it's really hard to make an argument not to refer for treatment or provide treatment. If you have distress, you can sometimes kick that can down the road, especially if the distress is minor and if the story is new, right? Heretofore, I've never been especially anxious, and this one thing has come up that's a complete fluke, etc. We find those stories to be uncommon. I mean, maybe that's selection bias because we're an anxiety specialty place. But what we find often is that people's report of their anxiety is actually an underestimate. I've become so used to being anxious that it doesn't stand out to me that I'm anxious. So you're asking me how anxious a guy I am, and I say it's not that bad because, it's no worse than it was a month ago or 2 months ago. I, as a child, am unable to compare myself to the general population, so I don't have perspective on just how bad it is. Let me speak to avoidance. I think I alluded earlier that avoidance is anxiety's best friend. Avoidance is anxiety's best friend because it's the greatest opportunity for anxiety really to spread. I'm a nervous flyer, but I fly. I wind up being a person that goes a bunch of places, albeit nervous. I'm nervous about socializing, but I go to parties. I still have friends. Once you throw avoidance into it, right? Once I don't go to the party or don't take the exam or don't go to school, right? Those are much bigger examples. Once I don't go, what I've done then is I've thrown away the cap on my own expectations. We were saying before that anxious people are great at playing the wouldn't it be terrible if sort of game, where they imagine all the things that could go terrible. One of the sort of reality check things that happens when you don't avoid and you go, right? I think to myself, wouldn't it be terrible if I ever got a B on an exam? And I make myself take my exams, and eventually I do indeed get a B. And what I find out in getting my B is that it wasn't nearly as terrible as I thought. And that, in fact, my 1B averaged in with all my other A's turns out to be an A at the end of the day anyway, in the cumulative average at the end of the year. You see, avoidance allows your anxiety to change your lifestyle such that you now have new ways of living and patterns of behavior, and it makes you more a prisoner to the anxiety. You want to be very, very careful about that. The first cousin to avoidance is parental accommodation. All parents are guilty of this, myself included. I love my child beyond description, and the love of one's child often makes you want to do a lot of junk for them. And it is not hard to understand how your child who's terrified ordering in a restaurant, that you order for him. Or you keep going to that restaurant where it's easy for him to order for some reason. That sort of parental accommodation is both understandable, but ultimately not helpful. Because what happens is you've got to acquire these skills somewhere along the way. You know, that we need 16 and 17-year-olds, you know, they're on the precipice of going to college. And the challenge that you have, of course, is that while you're at home, I'm accommodating and making up and helping and etc. You know, a couple of years ago, we had a case where the child had never spoken to a server, you know, never ordered meals, never, this is before the apps when you had to actually call a pizzeria to get a pizza delivered. She'd never done it. And the parents sent her off to a very good university, and she was home in a month because she was too terrified to go eat in the sort of common cafeteria area. And that capacity to speak up for herself was never developed because her very loving and well-intended parents made lots and lots of accommodations, understandably, but the net effect of which was that the kid was left without being able to do things that it turns out they really, really needed to do in the real world. The referral. All right, so look, you got these kids, what do you do with them? You can treat them yourself if you feel comfortable and have the time. That's a big ask, I think. Some of these are here because I was thinking that there would be more parents in the audience. I encourage parents to talk to their pediatricians and talk to their primary care providers, to call local hospitals and call local universities. The local hospitals have departments of psychiatry. They're often connected to a network of outpatient therapists, and local universities have a psychology department. The psychology department would know all of their recent graduates, you know, who are still practicing in the area. And then, of course, the friends' experiences. I like friends' experiences most of all. Most of the referrals to our place come through past families. You know, what we jokingly refer to as the mommy mafia here in New York City, where one mom has a nice experience and tells her friends. You get two things there. One is you get a referral to a source that you can have faith in because someone you know has gotten good service by them. The other thing you get is social support. You know, having a child who has a thing is a really big drag, and have that further complicated by having some sort of shame or secrecy around it makes it all the worse. I am in a profession of secrets, right? I sit and talk to people in soundproof rooms with a legal requirement to keep secret all they tell me. And the incredible irony I find is that virtually everyone's confiding nearly the identical secrets in me. And if they would share these secrets with each other, I think what they'd find is community and company and the ordinariness of it. All of us who have kids know that your kids come with whatever problems they come with. And seeking out referrals from friends opens up not just a network of referrals where other people have had good experiences, but a network of support for yourself. The how to navigate this is not obvious to parents. And a parent friend who's navigated this before you is often a really good and helpful guide, at least so that you know you're not alone. So that's referral. There's various, this is just one example. How do I get the information from the kid, right? This person has come to my office, or the adult or whomever, this person's come to my office. You get different options of cracking this. This is an example of one pediatric symptom checklist. There's a couple of them. This one I have here because it's available for free online. If you Google PSC 17, you'll get it too. There's a way to score this, but even if you don't score it in some official way, you can see, right? If someone endorses, feels sad and unhappy often, I mean, how much more do you need? Some people like this. Oh yeah, we're already right at the end. So people vary in what they prefer. You can find this online. The Reach Institute is a great resource too, and you might want to talk to Reach about the resources that it has available to aid in the assessment process. You know your place is best. Some people find it helpful to have a screening instrument like this that everybody fills out so that nothing is missed. Other people find it helpful to ask the patients when they're with them. There's benefits to each. the nice thing about a screening measure is it makes it less likely that you'll miss something. And visits with primary care providers can be experienced by patients as so rushed and time limited. Maybe they're not expecting or open to the conversation. So both of those are available to you. Anyway, in summary, and before I conclude, the way I've mentioned it is our best science about anxiety disorders, that genetics leads to vigilance, leads to this way of thinking where the anxious things I believe, I go forward and create even more evidence that they exist. Living in this world, in that framework, I cannot help but be anxious. The anxious me should be met with a definitive plan, a plan to push back on my thoughts, to plan more thoughtfully for my behavior, to garner social support, and to add medicine if necessary. And when assessing these things, part of what you want to look for is level of distress and level of impairment. And that assessment can be done both in conversation and by screening measures. And with that overview said, I'll shut up and I'll take whatever questions there are.
Thanks, Michael. So, Aiden or Christina, do we have any questions in the Q&A?
Looks like we don't have any questions as of yet, but again, if you do have a question or comment, you can go ahead and click that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and type in your message.
Great.
And we did have, some of you had submitted questions when you registered. One question, Michael, was, I think you've answered this already in your talk, but how do you teach parents that anxiety is real?
Oh, interesting. We don't find that problem as often. Now, this might be a byproduct of the place that we run. What we find more often to be true is that a lot of anxious parents recognize the anxiety in their kids because it's so much like their own anxiety. If there's no reason to get into big conversations with parents about whether it's real, because arguing whether it's anxiety or this or that, I think the simpler way to navigate that, because what we're interested here is getting people from your primary care office into a mental health professional's office. There's no need to debate whether it's anxiety or depression or that the kid's oppositional. The only thing we need to agree upon is that Billy is underliving his abilities, that you and I both agree that the kid is capable of big things and he's not accomplishing big things. Some impediment exists in the way, and that impediment is worthy of investigation. And so I wouldn't, the hill I would die on is not convincing people that it's anxiety and not depression, or anxiety and not oppositionality. I think if my interaction with patients was as primary care provider, I think I would just want to convince them that there was sufficient cause for further investigation.
Thank you. Someone asked if the recording will be available to watch later, and the answer to that question is yes, we will have it available on our website. Another question has to do with referral. So how do you find a good counselor match for a child? Any thoughts about that?
Oh, sure. The list I gave before, I think, is a reasonable list. I'll double down on my recommendation. Go through your network of moms. Today, I need a dermatologist for my acne-faced 13-year-old boy, and I texted my friend who's a nurse and said, hey, who did you use for your girls who are a bit older? And what that yielded was someone that she had used and had good, faith in. And the fact that she had kids that are 3 years and 6 years older than my own, they're kind of on the other side of the teenage acne, perhaps. So I would really, really double down on my network of friends and contacts that way. If I was new to an area or for some reason didn't have that network, I would, of course, ask my primary care provider or my pediatrician. And if I would add one other thing in there, a lot of parents worry greatly about the right match. That I took my, the importance of level. This will be controversial. The importance of level of match is probably overstated. It's hard for me to believe that someone who came to my center and saw, Dr. Teal instead of Dr. Levitt, instead of Dr. Jenkins. They're all very nice, likable people with similar skill sets. If you've taken your child to one or more therapists and it hasn't worked out, it might be because your child is really, really reluctant to be in treatment. You don't have to love your therapist to think the advice is okay, right? I have a dentist. I won't go on record as to whether I love or don't love my dentist. I don't have to love that person. I do have to follow their advice. So be careful. Sometimes parents get caught in a trap of, if only I find the perfect therapist, my child will then listen and learn these skills. But please remember, you can learn skills from people even if you don't love them. They just have to be knowledgeable and trustworthy. So, which let us hope that, let's hope all therapists are, but certainly the enormous preponderance of them are.
True. So a couple questions from the Q&A. One, when talking about exposure, you had mentioned 3 steps. Step 1 was empathy. Step 3 was asking the client to do the task. This person wants a reminder about what is step 2.
Sure, preparation. So you come to me and you say, look, Michael, I'm terrified of flying. And I've got to respond to that with empathy. You've really got to get it that I actually give a damn about this, which I do. And that it would mean a lot to me to see you have your victory of being able to fly. Fine, done. That has to come first. Nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And fine. We've now agreed that I get it and you get it, and that, boy, it'd be great if you'd fly. We should come up with 2 or 3 things for you to do to make flying easier. The strategic use of distraction, right? We're going to make sure you get on the plane with enough junk to keep you busy. Maybe the use of proximity. I'm going to bring someone on the plane with me who's like my go-to person, that sort of chattiest best friend who always makes me feel better. Maybe a competing emotion of excitement about the place you're going, so that the only emotion you have flying isn't the dread of feeling stuck inside a plane. Maybe some sort of mindfulness planned exercise for while I'm in the plane. Maybe some safety scanning, right? I'm going to notice whether the flight attendants appear upset or calm. Those would be reasonable skills to sort of put in your back pocket before you get on the plane, right? Alternatively, my exposure is, well, I can do this all day long if you pick different things to expose people to. My exposure is that I'm intimidated. I'm a little kid. I'm intimidated about spending time independent from my parents. The exposure activity is going to be spending time apart from your parents. You're going to have to spend a little bit more time doing empathy, right? Because you're having to convey empathy to a younger person. That can sometimes be harder to do because they don't see the logic of things as quickly as an adult does. But once the kid gets it that you really care about them, and gets it that independence is kind of a necessity, right? As you get older, you get more independent. You can see the exposure setup. We're going to agree that having your mom hang out in the hallway while you sleep is okay, but having your mom all the way down the hall is not okay, right? That's a small, medium, or large. But before you ask you to do either of those, we're going to teach you something. What is it that you do while lying in your bedroom without your mom? For young kids, what we often recommend is what we refer to as super duper distraction. I, a young kid, have a TV show that I know and I've watched so many times. Little Mermaid, isn't there? There's a new Little Mermaid, I think, coming out, or isn't there a new Snow White? But anyway, I've watched Little Mermaid so many times I could close my eyes and virtually see the movie inside my head. And so the skill I'm going to use is distraction. I'm going to lie in my bed. I'm going to try to play that movie in my head, so that the thoughts of the Little Mermaid soothe me more than my own kind of anxiety generating thoughts. So So those are the three thoughts. Empathy has to arrive first. If you start giving someone advice and they appear disinterested in your advice, it's usually that your empathy has not arrived sort of fully enough for them to be open to your advice. So empathy first, advice, the skills you're teaching them second, and then a well-planned and graduated ask of, hey, let's go do that thing you're nervous about is third.
Great, thank you. So we are over time, but we have two questions, and if we'll try to answer those quickly, and then thank you all for your time. The first question out of the two was, how do you approach the family whose anxious child probably doesn't need medicine yet, but would benefit from therapy, but the family is resistant to therapy?
Oh, gotcha. All right. So these are really unfortunate things, and primary care providers get stuck with this a lot more than we do, because people call my number when they've decided to, engage in our services. So we get people who are past this hump. I think there's 2 points of comparison that are worth having, right? One is, what we do clinically is we compare the patient today to how the patient was yesterday. But we also compare the patient to how different they are from their norms, right? I'm a high blood pressure, 160 over 100 guy, and today I'm 150 over 90. I'm improved, but I'm still out of whack. And when parents are reluctant to engage their kids in treatment, they're often doing the comparison of today to yesterday. He's always, he's not so bad, he was worse a week ago, etc. And what I ask parents often is, if I knew you like 10 years ago, if the boy is 10 years old, and I asked them, look, if I knew you 10 years ago and I was there on the occasion of your child's birth, and I said, oh, by the way, when they're 10, they're going to be unable to sleep independently. You would have really recoiled at that idea. The idea that your son would be missing out on something that so many other kids would be able to do. You would think that's not kosher. That's not okay by me. It's living with a child who's been so reluctant to sleep independently has kind of changed your view on this. We raise our kids, but our kids raise us too. Be careful. Your kids waltz you into corners on things all the time. The no video games for you. All right, a half an hour. All right, an hour. Our kids convince us of things that our better judgment does not want us to do. And don't let your kids' reluctance to treatment convince you not to send them.
That's important advice. And then our last question is, what is the timeline for therapy for an anxious kid, kind of roughly? And when could you expect to see improvement? So the length of therapy versus, you already mentioned about medication, but that's the question.
Sure. You'd like to see. I'm pausing just because I'm debating how strong an answer to give. You see, we divide. When my job was doing clinical trials, we made two types of improvement: the decrease in distress and decrease in impairment. So I'm a shy kid who has no friends. That kid's going to get better in steps. The first thing he's going to report is that I feel symptomatically better and less intimidated by the prospect of having friends. He will then later, as a byproduct of being less intimidated about having friends, actually go and make friends. So when you're scoring improvement, you got to be smart about what you're scoring, because you'll see symptomatic improvement before you'll see functional improvement. What you see early on in therapy, and you'll see 3 visits in, 4 visits in, is the patient's engagement in the process. One of the biggest determinants of success is the patient level of engagement. The advice of cognitive behavior therapy, some of which I've listed this evening, when you hear it, you don't think, oh my God, I've never thought of anything so clever in my life. Some of it passes as something any reasonable person would say. The difference in its success is how hard the person's going to work it. And part of what you'll see a month in is how much buy-in you have from patients. So patient buy-in, you'll see early, symptomatic improvement, you'll see earlier than functional improvement. The inclination to be anxious, as we were saying early on, is largely heritable. And it's not that uncommon for people who are worriers. You know, we often joke around our place that we're turning big worriers into medium worriers. And it's not that's a nice outcome. You know, the difference between big and medium is the difference between a small and an ordinary life. And so that's a big difference. And it shouldn't surprise any of us that the child who's extra nervous about their school exams when they're in 8th grade, maybe they reappear in your office when it's time for SATs and ACTs. Same kind of challenge years later, bigger provoker. So I hope that's not too rambling an answer, but buy-in is the best thing. It's the single best predictor of improvement in CBT.
Thank you. So that concludes our webinar for tonight. Thanks again, Michael, for a great presentation. We just wanted to let you know how you could stay connected with Reach on social media, so you have that there. And then we also wanted to let you know about upcoming courses. So we do have an entire course on CBT for anxiety and pediatric primary care. The next one is coming up on Saturday, October 28th. And in that course, we dig deeper in some of the stuff that Michael was talking about and actually teach primary care providers how they can support anxious kids in their practice. We also have other courses that we have listed there, and you can also find them on our website. We will record this. This has been recorded, and we will post it on our website if anybody wants to listen to it again in the future. But thanks again, Michael, and thanks to all of you for joining us tonight.